Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another D6 Wounds podcast. I'm here with none other than the man himself, Dr. Luke Blackseal. How are you, sir?
Yeah, very well. Punk enjoying 1.5 and all it represents.
Yeah, we got a lot to get through, haven't we? I mean, it's for me, there was lots of commentary online, there were lots of discussions and podcasts and everything, and I just thought I'd got to take a breath. It's such a big change. Let's get some games in. I've been to a few events now. I know you've been to a few events, and just trying to soak it all up and see how everything's going to shake out because it's so much change. And I want to get into the weeds. I want to get into the discussion about specifically the changes and how they've impacted the game, and talk a bit about Games Workshop's decision making and the future of that and how the community has reacted to it. But I suppose a good place to start is by talking about change generally, right? Because there's been a lot of change all at once. We've had the match play guide. It's now a very different game. There's the rules changes, the 1.5 edition. There's a new faction that's come out. And obviously, change benefits people who like change, people who follow the change, who keep up with it, and of course, people who've got the time and money to adapt to that change before anyone else does, right? So there are winners and losers, winners and losers out of change. I said wizards there.
Well, they didn't win, did they? They
Well,
got their
wizards
magic.
didn't
They got
know.
there. They only get +2 now instead of +4. Yeah, so change. Absolutely. The singular word that was on our current government's manifesto in the last election, change. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And yes, it is the most profound inter-edition change we've ever seen. I mean, in Warhammer Fantasy in the past, there were FAQs that came out 6th, 7th, 8th. There were informal FAQs a bit before that, but there were never things that represented such a hard pivot as what we've had here. Some of the real changes to the fighting rank, especially press of battle, the changes to inventory, even some of the little things like the changes to challenges, really altering the meta with the dragons. And at the same time as that, the matched play guide and all the missions that introduces, and also almost at the same time, a new faction, which is, as we'll come on to talk about, a very competitive faction. And so in competitive play, changes things up quite considerably. So it really genuinely is 1.5. And it does feel like it's both a new game, a new meta for competitive players, and a new kind of way of playing. And to be honest, I think that's a good thing. I think that it's sorely needed. I think that Old World 1.0 and competitive play was starting to get a bit washed out. Certainly, I was finding with my Bretonians that every game was the same. Even with my Warriors of Chaos, I was finding that unless I deliberately handicapped myself, every game was getting a bit similar. And so I think it really was needed. And, a lot of people like me, and you have been quite critical of the rules. And, they have listened, they have responded. What they
Yeah.
may have come up with, on the other hand, well, it's harder to say because one of the perversions is that while I think they've made the game better, most of the changes I think make it better, they may have disrupted the balance between factions. And in Old Point World 1.0, most of the core factions and arguably two of the legacy ones were all sort of competitive. Whereas now I think that there are really three factions which are quite far ahead of the others. The two
Okay.
undead armies, Cathay, and then maybe Bretonia is the leader of the guys in the middle. And that might, I don't know, not have such great effects.
Yeah, and obviously the discussion on meta is very interesting, and we can get into more detail about that later. But I suppose for a lot of people, it doesn't they don't play it that competitively. It doesn't really matter so
Yeah.
much, which faction's doing that well in the competitive scene. But what does matter is, you take a new player, for example, right?
Yeah.
Who's trying to get into the hobby now.
Yeah.
There are more documents for them to look at. There are the rule book's totally
Yeah.
different. So you pick up the rule book, they'll be playing a different game. There are the FAQ document, they've got to go through that at the same time and figure
Yeah.
out how that changes the rules. Where they would previously have, an archive, like our battle reports on our YouTube channels are all 1.0,
Yes.
and that's no longer that helpful for them when figuring out the game to look at all the online content. Obviously, there's increasing stuff for 1.5 now. Um, but it's just a lot more difficult, isn't it, for that new player to come in and get their head around the rules. And a lot of it's a lot more complex as well, and we can talk about some of that complexity later.
Absolutely. I think that's right. I mean, I think the two real groups that, in a sense, kind of benefit from this change or will enjoy Old World 1.5 are, first of all, competitive players for whom had played a lot of games and for whom the meta was getting a bit stale. Fine for them. And also players who might not necessarily be competitive, but who have played a lot. And usually people who play a lot are more competitive, but not always. But for the new player, as you say, or the occasional player, the
Yeah.
kind of guy who wants to play once a month or 6 times a year or something, is not going to find his list really works in the same way. Probably will be able to select it, but it won't be the same on the battlefield. And the rules have changed more profoundly, I think, than just the actual changes because the meta has shifted. And it's weird because, in a way, if you were just impervious to the meta and just simply played with the models that you have, I don't think you would find such a huge difference in 1.5 to 1.0 unless you were playing with a lot of infantry. But if you are following the meta, even to any extent, and that most people do, even who are casual, see online content, then I feel as though the cultural shift that has come with this change to 1.5 is probably
Yeah.
greater than the actual changes to the rules. And so, in a weird way, there'll be a sort of a halo effect that projects outwards, which might affect players who are more casual because they are taking their lead, if you like, from the more sort of rarefied elite discourse, if you want to call it that, amongst competitive players who are making videos.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the match play guide on its own just had an instant impact on the competitive scene, didn't it? Whereas previously people were playing with a little bit of a mission or very light, maybe a slight change of deployment or
Yeah.
one objective at the most. And all of a sudden they're playing with loads of missions and objectives all at once. That had an immediate impact.
Yes.
Um, and
Yeah.
some of the more casual players might have been playing with objectives already. But I mean, you mentioned the occasional player, right, who plays once a month. Consider someone like that, 18 months into the game. So maybe they play once a month, maybe twice a month if you're lucky,
Yeah.
and not at all for the first few months because they're still figuring out the rules, right? So maybe over 18 months, they might have played 10, 15 games of Old World.
Yeah.
And then the rules change so much all of a sudden. That's a big, well, at least for me, it would be if I was a very occasional player, a big disincentive to continue with that because you just think, well, okay, it's changed again. Then when's it going to change next time? I mean, let's say 6 months from now, at Christmas time, there's
Yeah.
another couple of arcane journals. They announce Kislev for next summer,
Yeah.
and you're just going, well, how can I keep up with this? You know?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think that maybe the demographic of people who play Old World, a lot of them, as we know, something like 75% of them, according to that survey, were players who had played fantasy before. So
Yeah,
you've got an older age demographic. Now, that probably means that these guys who are playing this are probably people who are playing at a slightly slower speed, that they've got work, family commitments. They probably play lots of other games as well. And they may not be, shall we say, kind of connected on the wire in the same way as someone who's just totally immersed, oops, daisy, totally immersed into the scene. And so maybe they might have slightly misread their audience there in a way. I think the audience of Warhammer The Old World probably like a slightly slower pace of change in general, compared to, for example, if you've got like, I don't know, like a video game or something that's being patched and most of the players are people in their mid-20s and they're just really into the zone and they can't wait for changes to happen. There are some people like that, but I don't think that's as many people in
mm.
Warhammer The Old World as there probably are in Warhammer 40,000, proportionally, I mean, to the community sizes.
Yeah. I mean, there was some chat online, wasn't there? I'm not quite sure what the evidence for this was that Old World was now a main game from Games Workshop, and it was on a three or
One of the
4 year
big
cycle.
four.
One of the big four.
Mm.
Fine. So that is, I suppose, evidence that it's on a 3 or 4 year cycle or something, and
It
that there's,
is.
yeah,
It's evidence of that. But if that is genuinely the case, and that is now considered to be one of the big four, alongside what are the other ones? So obviously 40K, Horus Heresy, and what's the fourth one? The other one.
AOS, right?
iOS, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Duh. Oh, I forgot even it existed. Sorry. Right. Okay, so the fact that it's achieved that, presumably with a far smaller sort of budget, and it might be the smallest leg of the stool, but it's a leg of the stool nonetheless. That's actually a major point in itself, which we probably should, tip our hat to at
Yeah,
least.
I mean,
You
that's a
are
great.
right that also your sort of secondary derivative point that it probably is on a 3 or 4 year product cycle probably also is right. So this probably means that 1.5 of Old World probably will run for only 2 years,
Yeah,
um, and then it will change again, and that might be again in itself slightly off-putting for your more occasional sidelines player who's played a few games here and there, remembers old editions, wants to get back in, but doesn't want to literally take the plunge. And I think there are a lot of players like that who are in the broader fantasy diaspora because this game was so much more popular in the past than it is now. And
Yeah,
as I say, people often forget that the audience is primarily people who played in the past. And,
yeah,
they've got often they're people who have got money. That's the first thing. Sometimes they have time as well. Um, or if they don't have a lot of time, it might just be their only hobby. And this is different from just something that's just kind of cool and just being sold to, the young hip crowd. So I don't know if this rapid turnover will work in the way perhaps they think. And I do slightly fear that if we have a game that's changing very quickly, and is, the books are going out of date quite fast, that you are catering to a small number of really
yeah.
dedicated players who have gone right down the rabbit hole. And they're going to buy a lot and be very committed to it. But are you going to be able to grow sideways so easily with what is, after all, and especially now, by far the most complicated of the games Games Workshop make? This is far more complicated than any of the other games.
I'm worried about the same thing. Yeah, as you say, and that's a good analogy down the rabbit hole by having
Yeah.
a smaller group of people who really understand all the rules, who, get all the arcane journals. I mean, I reckon there are a lot of people who initially were buying all the arcane journals and now have given up trying to get all of them.
Yes.
Because, yeah, I mean, just because they've come out of very quick succession now, and basically they've announced two at once, and it kind of looks like there's going to be another round of arcane journals
Well,
now.
if you have the second arcane journal, like the second regen, then yeah, sure. Yeah, I was buying all the arcane journals to start with, and then it got, I think, to the orc one, and then I stopped.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
I mean, and they're okay, but they're not. I don't think the arcane journals are that good as source books
yeah,
compared to the old army books from previous editions. I mean, they've only got 48 pages. The text is also quite large. It's not like the old army books,
no.
which are just full of stuff. And so, I don't want to have them that much from that perspective.
I'm quite a slow player as well, in the sense that although I keep up with the rules and I keep up with the FAQs quite religiously, I like to collect and paint an army over a long period of time. Like I'm painting an army at the moment, and it's almost half finished, and it's going to take the rest of the year at least
Yeah.
before it's on the tabletop. And I don't play online, and I don't want to play with unpainted models. I paint an army and then I play with it, right? And so maybe I'm old school there,
Well,
and
and this is the interesting continuum here.
yeah,
You are that, but you also don't want to be too disadvantaged for taking on that kind of attitude.
right,
And I'm if anything better and worse in some ways. I mean, I'm even slower than you as a painter. That's certainly one thing, but certainly there is a feeling to want to be rewarded for that and to be able to actually put things on the table that are kind of viable. We understand that there are certain things that are good in one edition and not in another. I mean, that's just part of
yeah,
the kind of carousel, isn't it? I mean, I don't like it when there are some things that don't exist in one edition for the other.
yeah,
R.I.P. my Skull Crushers and my War Shrine, for example. I don't like that, but the power changes I don't mind. What I don't like is when you get things like, for example, the Cathay balloons list, the dwarf list, which is only gyrocopters, or the Pegasus Knight list, or anything like of those things. That's obviously just so much better. That unless you do that, and that might not be the most interesting thing to have on the tabletop. Like I don't mind Pegasus Knights, but I don't like what they look like as much as I do normal knights.
yeah.
And so it's a little bit, I don't know. Sometimes if you are the collector and the painter, it can feel a little bit annoying to have your stuff you being having to fight at an obvious disadvantage compared to if you chase the meta.
Yeah.
And
I
that
guess
is
what I'm saying
irritating.
is, I'm someone who plays quite a few games. I mean, I'm not like regularly every week playing Old World, but I
Yeah.
go to events quite regularly. I organize games quite regularly. I keep up with the rules, and if even it's getting too fast for me,
Yeah.
and I'm at least sort of more than halfway up the competitive spectrum, of like casual to committed player. I'm sort of more than halfway up that slider. What's
Yeah.
it like for everyone to the left of me
Yes.
who, you know what I mean?
I think it creates probably a harder break between the more kind of elite discourse that you're going to kind of see online. I mean, especially
Yeah.
with people who are playing loads of games on Warhol and they're played, say, the gyro list versus the five balloon list like 10 times or something,
Sure.
that they exist on a different level in terms of experience. And while I'm probably, well, I do more tournamenting than you do, and I am a competitive player. I'm mainly that because I'm using what I know about 8th edition and ninth age, not because I know the old world that well. But those guys who are really, down the rabbit hole with all these test games online, I think that just their sheer exposure to the game will just, in a sense, probably elevate what they're doing. Elevate is the wrong way of putting it. Marginalize is another way of putting it, or just other it
Yeah.
into a different kind of plane where they may just talk about the game in a way that doesn't make it might not immediately make the most sense to casual players. And obviously, if they can communicate it in a way that does make sense to them, then hats off to them. But I do feel that with the very extreme lists, especially the 360-degree lists, where everything is just 360, it goes into an alien universe very quickly, and it doesn't look like Warhammer anymore or sound like it. And so when that's being portrayed online, it may just look and sound like a different game from what people are playing on the table. And I don't like there being a disconnect. I think it's important that all the wagons on the train, even if they go at different speeds, are all kind of moving in the same direction, and the guys in the back wagon can at least see the locomotive at the front, so to speak. And I'm not sure they will soon.
Well, I think it was you that said in a discussion we were having recently that you used the phrase meta-centric. And
Yes,
I thought that was quite a good word in the sense that there is a kind
indeed.
of
Yes,
meta-centricity at the moment in that, if you can keep up with all the rules and understand them well, if you can learn how all the missions work before everyone
yeah,
else, if you can 3D print and
yes,
contrast paint an army out quickly, then you're able to keep up with the meta. That gives you, I mean, that's always going to give you an advantage in any game system, but especially one that's changing so quickly.
yes. I think, though, it depends slightly what one wants to reward from a competitive play perspective. I mean, to some extent, learning the rules is part of being good at the game. Of
Absolutely.
course it is. It has to be. Likewise, I mean, reacting to meta, I mean, that's a bit more controversial, but, part of the game, because meta doesn't always have to come from new releases. It can just come from what people are doing themselves. And you think, oh, well, a
Yeah,
lot of people are doing this, so I'm going to do that.
exactly.
Okay. It's part of the rock, paper, scissors of it. But the thing that I tended to instinctively enjoy or think is worthy of being rewarded on the table tends to be things like unit trading, chaffing, out deployment, picking the right fights against the right foes. In other words, eternal core skills of Warhammer Fantasy
Mm.
that work in any edition, albeit have different manifestations. And when our world moves more towards meta focused stuff, especially when there's 360, where you don't really have to move around, you just don't have arcs of sight anymore, you end up just moving the game more towards someone who's down the rabbit hole, in the meta zone, knows what's new, what's hot. And are they the best players at Warhammer Fantasy? I don't think so. They could
Right.
be, but they don't have the kind of skills, or those kind
Yeah.
of skills are not ones I respect as much. And I dislike being beaten by players who I know that I am better than in the skills that I have described, but they're just more kind of like connected to like the sort of,
Yeah.
the sugar rush from Nottingham, and they just like kind of know everything and they've got their disgusting army and all the rest of it. I mean, I'm not saying I'm immune to it. I had 11 Pegasus in the list that I was smashing people with. So I'm not immune at all. I just painted Pegasi. But
Yeah.
as I say, it's what you want to reward. And that
It's
to
almost,
me,
yeah.
I'm a little bit, that's not gospel for me. That's what I like and what
Yeah.
I find, what I think should be worthy.
And I agree with that totally. I get a little bit turned off by the international Warhammer scene where
Yes.
or the team-based events
Yep.
where it's all about this beats that and this beats that, and then I'm going to put
Oh.
this army into that army and put this army into that army, and it's
This
kind
whole
of the
phrase of
game.
something into something. Again, this is this jingo, this
Yeah.
lingo that I just don't know about. Well,
Well,
I went 4-0 when I went into this.
I think I'd quite like to play in one of those events because it's like you've got your
Yeah,
team and you're going. It could be a lot of fun, but it's almost like the game is decided in the matchups rather than the game, and it's almost
that I agree. I have played team events before, and I do think that there is an interest. It doesn't have to be things like the Four Nations, which was, just concluded. It doesn't have to be that. But if you've got a bunch of different armies, and you play this little pairing game, and there are variations on that in the team tournament,
Yeah.
then there is it is enjoyable in a way sometimes. Traditionally, say if you're, a dwarf players tend to be in team events tend to be thrown into hard matchups quite a lot because the army is quite resilient. It's quite
Yeah.
good at drawing games. It's a bit like that. So in a sense, the dwarf guy in a sense feels as though he's like the defender or something. He's not very glamorous, but he's there to stop the rampaging juggernaut. Whereas the Bretonnian guy on his team is maybe the one who scores the big win because he's got the ability to take off his enemy. So there is a fun with that, I think.
Yeah.
I don't mind the team events. I just personally don't like the sportification of the discourse around the hobby. And that is a bit more of my own just view about it, because I think it pushes it away from being an immersive game about a fantasy battle and more towards a professional sport. And I like sport, but I don't think Warhammer is one. And so I prefer to think about a fancy battle. But other people don't agree. And there is that is a way of injecting excitement into the game that some people really enjoy.
What do you think of the mission-based play now in 1.5 edition?
I think, okay, so there were missions that were, so your viewers may not be aware of this, but in 8th and in the 9th Age, and in some Old World as well, like in the Black Country Brawl events, they were playing missions that added or deducted 3 tournament points. Hold the center, get into your opponent's deployment zone, capture strategic location on the table. So these did exist, but mostly you're right, there were no missions. Now there are. We've got the baggage train, we've got the
that's what I mean. The secondary objectives.
Objectives where there are between 2 and 4 points on the table. A strategic location, which is a building. You have to control that. 250 victory points at the end. All of these things. What do I think of them? I think they're good. I think they improve the game. I think players, TOs should be a bit more conservative on how many they include. I think they should be a couple of them per game rather than all of them. I think all of them is ridiculous. But I do think that they are interesting. I do think they change the meta game in ways that aren't always desirable. Like many of them involve standing around in the middle of the board, and that favors armies that can do that and resurrect their models and then resurrect them again. That. And so I do think they improve it, but at the same time, I think they have to be, enjoyed responsibly, like alcohol.
Yeah, your view is very similar to mine in that I think I like the secondary objectives. They changed the game in a way which was needed. And I agree with what you said sort of 10 minutes ago in that before in 1.0, it felt like a lot of the armies were just very similar all the time. And so if I was playing Chaos, it was the same list. It was the dragon, and then maybe the other dragon or the spawn, and then the dragon ogres, and then you either had the knights or you had a small brick of warriors or Forsaken. It was the same list every time. Yeah. And I felt like every time I was playing Chaos, I was playing the same army. Same with Bretonnians, particularly the Bretonnians. Every time I was playing Bretonnians, it was like the same game.
Yeah, but now, the only variant,
Yeah, now it feels different. Now it's like there's more incentives to take inventory. There's more different ways of playing, and that's changing the list building. And I find it's a little bit more varied. So overall, I'm very positive about it.
Yeah,
the TOs are putting slightly too many secondaries in each game, but overall, I feel it's changed it for the better.
I think so too. I mean, I do think that there are some changes in the sense that a lot of players used to in 1.0 hide their core units because they were just so much worse than everything else, and that wasn't that interesting apart from as a form of I've got my hunters and my prey, and we're going to play this game, and my core units are so bad that I'm just going to often clump them together in one block, or have a lot of little ones that just all run away. Now, because core can score, and the core units score in more of these objectives than other units.
Yeah.
Like they score on the strategic locations, they score on the special objectives. Some of the other ones like domination and baggage, you don't need to be core to get them, but the core is the best for that. And so there is an incentive to be more, to do something with your core, and also a slight question about whether you take a big block of core or whether you take more small units of core. And that is that I like. That's definitely interesting. And I can think of arguments for doing both of those things. Like for Bretonians, if you wanted to be competitive, I can see arguments for having a block of foot knights and men at arms, or still I can see arguments for having very small little units of knights that are still very agile and they mainly score rather than fight.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's good because having multiple objectives means you need to split up your core. And obviously, there's a cap 500 points on any unit anyway. So you kind of need 2 blocks of core at minimum. But also, the objectives are taken when 2 units are equally close by the higher unit strength unit. So you
Yes.
do want a relatively big unit
Yeah.
when you're contesting an objective, right?
Yeah.
But what do you think about this change that it's only the core that can score? Because I think it's great that core units have more of a role, and you're forced to use your core for the mission. Because remember in 8th Ed it was banners, right? It was units with banners.
Yeah.
Um, which meant that a unit from the special or rare section that had a banner could also score.
Yes.
Now it's only core, which is it's an interesting change. But the thing is, there's a lot of units which you don't see now because they're in the special section and they're not quite good enough to be an auto include in your army, and they don't score. And so now you just think, well, is there really a use for them? And there's also some units which are special but could also be taken in core, like your Graveguard, of course,
Yeah.
or your Black Orcs or something, which now have become really good because they're as good as a special unit. They're a special
Yeah.
unit, but now they can score as well.
I think it's had a lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
That, as you say, those units that should be special units, but you can take in core in certain conditions because they can kind of outfight core, now
Yeah.
become really good. But I agree with you that, in a sense, first of all, you have to have unit strength of 10 to score a lot of these objectives, which for non-horde armies is not an insignificant number to keep up. So the thing with core is, first of all, you have to have it, and secondly, per unit strength is usually cheaper than special or rare, obviously. And so, in a sense, it seems as though you want core. There's not really a reason to have special for scoring.
Yeah.
And the core problems with infantry, especially special or rare infantry, are still all there. I mean, it doesn't benefit so much from the extra fighting rank stuff because there aren't as many models, and they can't score. So there's definitely, I think, a redundancy, especially with special and rare elite infantry. I also think there's a little bit of a redundancy for heavy cavalry as well, although some light cavalry has been made a bit better. Like, for example, the Marauder Horsemen in Chaos are now, because they're each guy's unit strength 2, that's now quite a good scoring unit.
Yeah.
So it has changed things around, but I do think that some extra holes have kind of been opened. And it seems that the core infantry, preferably with high unit strength, the tar pits especially, are really good. But there are a few more redundancies in there as well that are a bit more regrettable. I don't know. It would be nice maybe if they actually changed, maybe have the ability of certain special units to score. I think there should just be a word that says scoring, and then they can score or something. This is what Ninth Age had. Or some other definition that's just a bit more granular. I think they're on the right lines, but maybe a little tweak down the line might bring in a few more of these other dude units who should be able to score. Like, I think a unit of White Lions, I feel, should be able to score. I mean, it seems silly that they can't.
Yeah. Or if you're going to make it core, at least exclude the Graveguard and the Longbeards and the Black Orcs and stuff, because you want it to be the actual Dwarf Warriors or the actual Skeleton Warriors and not the elite units,
Yes. Also, again, thematically, I don't know. It depends what you imagine the strategic location as being. I mean, light cav can go in and temporarily hold something, but then be pushed off. But also, there are some of the missions aren't just that. I mean, like the domination one, for example, is any unit, unit strength, and the baggage, you just have to be unit strength 5. So your monster can go in there and do it, but your single Pegasus rider can't. So there are some.
Yeah.
I think they chose all these numbers not very carefully, by the way, but I think there are definitely some changes, some quirks of it that I think are nice. I generally think it's better to have larger unit strength. I think it generally helps armies where there's more stuff on the board, generally, and armies that can resurrect their stuff as well, or grow their stuff as they can with vampires.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think a good tournament has a variety of missions and objectives that benefit different types of armies. We've talked about this on previous podcasts. And I think there's enough there for a TO to use the match play guide to design ones that are good for some missions are good for the all-out attacking armies, but in some missions, those attacking armies have to worry about their backfield
Yes.
getting hit. Good for defensive armies, but then again, there's some missions that force the defensive armies to break up a bit.
Yes,
Yeah.
they have to get the balance of the missions right. I think that's the crucial thing. I mean, weirdly, although maybe we'll come on to this when you talk about the sort of community and the renegades and stuff. The
Mm.
fact that the match play guide gives you options because, of course, it doesn't just change the options of the game. There are also all of these silly cards you can play during the game, like, oh, my war machine causes a panic test, I get extra points, and
Yeah.
it seems as though no one is using those. But the point is more this that you can choose how many of these missions to use all the time. And so, in a sense, for those who are worried about communities fracturing, then in a sense, that's kind of probably already going to happen. You're already going to get different tournaments playing different missions. And that's going to have a very big effect on the kind of armies that do well at different events. And so people will be playing slightly different games. And I think that's a good thing. But I think it was an absolute nonsense to think that it was a problem that people weren't. But maybe we'll come on to that later when we talk about the Renegades.
Yeah, that's to say. Let's do that a bit later and get into that sort of discussion about how much comp there should be and how much variation there should be. Linehammer. So
Yes.
Linehammer got nerfed. Lines no longer exist.
Oh, well, oh dear. Well, obviously, apparently, Linehammer didn't, or at least if it didn't exist, it didn't work according to the Bell of Lost Souls, according to Goonhammer. It was clickbait bullshit, according to certain senior games designers. Yes. So then they decided to comp it. Maybe it was a problem after all. Well, yeah, I mean, look, they were wrong. I was right. That's fine. You know, it wouldn't be the first time. Yes, but it was a problem, and I think it was a problem not because it was overpowered, but because it looked stupid.
Yeah.
And there is a move towards making it look less stupid. And obviously, because static combat res is now more of a thing, because you've got outnumbering, you've got close order reserved for unit strength 10, then once you start getting a few points for that, then suddenly having a few more extra points for ranks suddenly starts becoming more promising, and your second rank can fight as well, because they've done this weird thing with kind of bringing back step up by relabeling the actual fighting rank, the fighting rank, and all of this nonsense that they've done to try and assuage the 6th edition people just by renaming something. Yeah, that was clever, wasn't it? They fell for that, the suckers. Yeah, so, but the other things that make the game look silly haven't been addressed. The skirmish rules have got even worse, because the skirmish rules now, you have to have a majority of your models that can draw lines of sight, or you can't charge. So if there are 2 Pegasus Knights and there are 3 Pegasus Knights behind them, then you can't charge, apparently. And that's just horrible. I mean, I played in a game, an event I went to in the Saffron Slam, and one guy had a whole skirmishing corps, all skeletons, and skeletons on horses. The whole thing was, all of the army was skirmish. And it was all shooting. So technically, you have to be able to draw a line of sight with every single model. And what just happened very quickly was I just said, I'll just assume you can see with everything all the time.
Yeah.
And that's obviously kind of a bit of a buff, right? Because you can kind of then just clump it up and then just shoot with everything. But it seems impossible to not play any other way, because skirmishers are still so silly. And so the Linehammer was changed, and they made it, more of an incentive to rank up, which looks nice. They haven't changed the skirmishers. And the skirmishers look horrible as well. They need to do something about those to make something that looks more like Warhammer, because looks are important. What this game looks like is important. And as you've made that point very, very well yourself. So, we're not all the way there yet, but it's going to look a bit better than it has looked, which is horrible a lot of the time in the past.
Yeah, I agree with you totally on the skirmishes. I found that out very early on because I was playing Scots Wood Elves, and he went to shoot me. And I said, well, can he see at the back there? Can he see the back there? He was like, yeah, well, you can place them in a way so that they can all have a tiny little gap between them.
Yeah, like a little diamond.
Yeah. And then you sort of realized, well, if I'm actually going to make him produce all of those line of sight every time, the game's going to take forever. So you just say, okay, we'll just do what you want, whatever. It's just too ridiculous. Yeah.
It's a place where there's a clear difference between what actually players do in the game
Yeah.
and what the letter of the law is. And when they put in that other rule about the majority of skirmishing models having to be able to draw a line of sight to complete a charge, that is the kind of rule that there are no good, I can't see there being any good consequences there, because no, everyone is going to assume you don't have that. I'm going to clump all my Pegasus Knights in such a way they've all got wings sticking out. I'm not going to arrange them in such a way that a majority of them can see. And then someone will say, "Oh no, you can't do that."
Yeah. Yeah.
And they'll just seem like an absolute git for doing that, even if they might technically be right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just this parallel reality where they think the game is played in this way, and it's just not.
Yeah.
And I think that's because the people writing the rules don't know what they're doing, and I still don't think they know what they're doing. They're being bounced around from things like in a pinball machine, going off one bumper and another bumper, and all these random kind of nerfs to things and sudden changes, which they're doing because they're just being bounced into doing it because they know that what they produced was so full of holes. That they are very whack-a-mole in their nature.
So on the Linehammer thing, do you think if you hadn't coined the phrase Linehammer and made
Maybe.
those initial satirical videos, and I hadn't done some videos with 32 Rangers in a line, and
Yep.
there hadn't been that chap Andy who 2D6 who's done that, if there hadn't been YouTubers making videos on it, do you think they would have even sort of noticed that it was an
No,
issue? Yeah, I
no.
don't think so.
I think, and that's not to be aggrandizing about our own influence here. The point here is that despite what some people may think, this is a very small pond. And a few people making videos that have even got 5,000 views or something is enough, I think, to move the dial of discourse in
Hmm.
a small community. It's just the way, if we were 40K content creators, no, it wouldn't. It would be a few drops in the ocean. But this is old world and there's not a lot. And it's a smaller community. And so I do think that one reason I like talking about the game is that I don't feel as though my voice is irrelevant. I feel as though
Yeah.
actually I do have some ability to be able to shape the discourse. And that's actually really interesting and really nice, rather than just being, someone just shaking their fist at, the decisions made by an autocracy. It is an autocracy, but at the same time, it also is a commercial autocracy, and it wants to sell things to people, and they know what's going on. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Of
how
course.
they do, I don't know, but they
Yeah,
do.
whether it's directly or indirectly, yeah. But I remember in your video you used this phrase, a dog's breakfast of a
Yes,
rule set. And that unfortunately is kind of what it's become in the
yes,
complexity. And what you're saying is right in that the letter of the rules, if you follow it logically, no one's going to play it that way because it's just too time consuming and fiddly. Um, and I mean, one of the examples I made a video
mm.
one recently to do with the kind of knock-on effects of this Linehammer nerf on casualty removal. And I don't want to get into the weeds of the actual rules, but
This
just
is
the
a
fact
great
that
video, dear viewers. You should watch this, even though it's like I say, make sure you bring a drink with you or something, because it's a bit painful. That's not because the video is painful. The video is wonderful, but it's a video about something painful.
yeah, it's just that if you read the rules and you play it how it's written, it results in a very time consuming fiddly way of doing it, which is going to take it's just no one's going to play it like that. And so they it got me thinking about to what extent Games Workshop understands the consequences of their rules changes. Because I think
Right.
that I'm sure they understand it, or at least one or two of them understand it and can explain it to the rest. But I also think that politically they're in a bit of a bind because they can't just produce a whole new rule book 18 months in. They have to release an FAQ, right? And so it can't be that laden with explanations and diagrams. It has to be brief and
Yes.
it has to be a patch. It can't be pages of explanations, right? Because then everyone's going to be like, well, we need a new rule book. And therefore, politically, they can't explain it too much. And so they have to pretend as if it doesn't have all these knock-on effects on how the game is played. Whether they know that or not, I don't know. But I think they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, you know?
I think you're right about the politics of it. I mean, in a sense, if they had slightly different content, like let's say they produced videos that were instructional about how the game should be played, and that might not be a bad thing for them to produce. I mean, that they could in another. I could easily see that happening because I think there was some. that existed with Age of Sigmar, as I recall, when they sort of launched it. But anyway, if they did that, then people would be looking at those videos and saying, "Oh well, in the Games Workshop official video, they do it this way, so therefore that must be right." I mean, that's not this. I mean, it's a bit like the difference between the Quran and the Hadith. I mean, the Hadith being the sort of historic observations of the Prophet Muhammad's life and what he did as being an indicator to the will of Allah. But at the same time, those things not necessarily being in the Quran. And so there would be that there, but there's not. We don't know how they intend to do anything. All they do is these brief kind of patches, which are, as you say, they don't have diagrams. They're very, very short, and there is a great ambiguity about them. Perhaps their attitude is just that, the community will decide one way or the other, and in a sense, we don't really care that much. And perhaps that's right. Perhaps there is just a sort of a force of I don't know, just a synthesis, so to speak, that might emerge. And if people do it locally, that's different. Then maybe who cares? I mean, of course, back in the day, there were all sorts of local interpretations of rules that happened all the time, and that was just thought of as being part of the hobby. But now there's much more of an obsession with it being played in one correct way, and ideally that being the way that is how Games Workshop want. And that whole way of thinking about Warhammer is very alien, I think, to people, especially who remember the 80s and the 90s, and even, to be honest, quite a lot of the noughties as well. But that's kind of how things, in a sense, are now. For all sorts of complicated reasons. But I don't like it. I don't agree with it. I don't think people should do what Games Workshop says from first principles, actually. Never mind that.
Well, you used the whack-a-mole analogy earlier, and
yes,
I like that analogy because it's like the Nerf stick, isn't it? It's like something gets too big, we whack it down.
Yeah.
I also think another analogy which is quite apt is the pendulum. In that the pendulum swings too far one way, and then it has to swing all the way to the other side. And we've seen that with the poison, for example. It was not overpowered, but it was like being used in a kind of janky way with these massive blocks.
With the blocks.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it's like poison is just gone. And it's been whacked too hard. And the pendulum has swung completely the opposite direction.
Yes. And they didn't just nerf the poison blocks, which they could have. It was actually, they didn't need to do that anyway, because first of all, the poison only came out of two magic items that were a problem, the Spider Banner and the Amulet of the Serpent. So they could have just changed those.
Yeah.
And they also said that dudes beyond the second rank can't see the large target, who is the high value target that you want to shoot with poison anyway. So that they didn't need to then change poison, which ended up being, the rules say, with one of your attacks, it's poisonous and you can add +2 to wound. So if you've got witch elves and they've got multiple attacks, you have to have some dice that are not poison attacks, other dice that are the poison attacks, and of the poison ones, then you have to separate some of them into the ones that have got +2 to wound, where you're a 60. You have 3 different kinds of dice that could all wound. It's horrible.
I haven't actually thought that through, actually, because I haven't used poison.
It says only one. Most of the time it doesn't matter because you've only got one anyway, but witch elves have got several.
Really?
But the other point, as well as that dog's breakfast, when that is an absolute dog's breakfast point, that is absolute, the dog plus, is that skinks and wood elves with hangbang tips got nerfed by that poison thing. And that wasn't the intended target. No. They were both quite good, but they were also just the bread and butter of those two armies. And now they're kind of shit. And they didn't mean to do that. And they just went about things in the wrong way. It's just an example of how sometimes they have the right intentions, but when the hammer comes down on the mole, it just sort of hits it in a really crappy way and actually whacks the other mole next to it, who actually wasn't sticking his head out. He was down in the burrow, and just things end up getting a bit silly.
And the pendulum has swung all the way for infantry, right? And infantry now feel very tanky. And most games now, I see infantry with a 3-up save, including the parry.
Up for rolling 1 if you're a Jade Warrior.
Rerolling 1, for Jade Warrior or a Royal Clan Warrior. And it kind of feels like with the keeping the close order bonus, whereas other people have lost it, gaining the massed infantry bonus, it feels like infantry now are so solid when you've got a brick of them with hand, weapon, and shield that now, well, first of all, putting a dragon or a ridden monster into a block of infantry, it feels like it did in 8th Ed now, in
Yeah,
that you just can't do it
don't do
reliably
it.
and you're going to lose combat, you know.
Yep.
Um, and it also feels like if every army takes a big block of 3 up save infantry with a massive combat res, it could get pretty grindy, right? And
Yes.
and you could have a lot of grind hammer games, you know, that sort of feel
Yeah.
like in the middle of the table.
Yes. And that's not, I think that, there's definitely a place for that.
Oh
I
yeah.
feel as though, I think in 8th, because the difference was that your two things that went in the middle of the table all rolled zillions of attacks,
Mm.
that the body count was so high that it didn't last so long.
Yeah.
Whereas this, the body count's going to be really low. Neither unit will double outnumber each other.
Yeah.
I think people might start taking BSBs perhaps a bit more in this kind of Warhammer, because you don't want to roll a 10 and that thing fail. Whereas if you're 9 with a reroll, you should be all right. At least getting to fall back in good order. And I can see the body count there being very low. And also, when the infantry charges, it's only its front rank that's swinging anyway. And there's not
Yeah.
an incentive to charge. There's an incentive to be charged. So if
Have you found that
anything,
that's an issue? Because people have been complaining about that. I haven't yet seen that to be an issue.
I haven't played the right kind of armies for it.
Yeah.
But I think it's not so much that it's an issue. I think it's just a bit unfortunate, because it just seems a bit strange to be disencouraging a unit that really struggles to charge anyway,
Yeah.
making it even worse if it does.
Well, the
I
issue,
almost feel as though 3 rank should be able to fight if it charges. I would almost go the exact opposite of what they've done.
right. Yeah, because the issue, not, I don't think is an issue, or I haven't made my mind up as to whether it is an issue, but the issue that people are describing is where you've basically got 2 infantry blocks looking at each other and neither wants to charge.
Yes,
Yeah.
that could plausibly happen. And I mean, in a sense, maybe if the combats are very grindy and everyone is 3 up armor save, then it doesn't really matter so much whether they're fighting or not. But I think the infantry does still feel a little bit like it did in 1.0, in the sense that there were certain infantry blocks you could take in 1.0 that were just very hard to kill anyway. And so you've got this kind of this core usually that's just really hard to shift. And it's not, I just don't think it's very dynamic. You either, in a sense, outgrind it or you just don't fight it. And
Yeah.
when I've encountered large infantry blocks, as I have in several games of 1.5, with armies that are faster, admittedly, just don't fight it. Especially if people play win, loss, draw, it's not necessary to fight it at all. And I think that in 8th Ed, when there were these big infantry blocks, A, they could charge further, and B, because magic was more destructive, the wizards in the unit were still kind of hurting you from distance. Whereas this, it feels a lot more like the unit is just there,
Yeah.
and there might not be anything you can do about it, but also you might not need to do anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they can't catch you.
And is that a problem? I think it is a bit of one. But at the same time, there's still an incentive to put a big unit of infantry on the table, and for look, and that's got to be an improvement, right? Because
Oh yeah.
at least it looks great. At least you can, because infantry blocks, and I know you agree with this as well. I think that there are the most number of models in it. There is the possibility of expression of a lot more personality of an army, a lot more of the diversity of an army, and also you've got the core trooper there as well. You know, the guy who is at the core of the army, the orc, the chaos warrior. You know, and that to me is more interesting when I'm thinking about an army. If I'm thinking about armies in history, I'm more interested in the guy who is the rank and file dude rather than the commanders and things. That's different. And so I
it's a
like
skirmish
core
game.
infantry for that reason.
Yeah, you want it to look like a battle, not like a skirmish. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And anything that encourages that, is a good thing. I mean, I went to this event in Essex a couple of weeks ago, and I had 25 marauders in that event, and they actually were quite good. And they had hand weapon and shield, so 4 up armor rather than 3 up, warband, and so quite high leadership, quite high body count, but not very tough or anything. They did several things that were quite important. They fought and beat skeletons a few times because they're better than them. They enabled me. They managed to get into combat against things that they're better than men at arms, and managed to make the men at arms flee in the direction I wanted them to flee because they had highest unit strength. They managed to beat a Saurus hero through challenging him out on combat res. they did quite a lot of things. There was one bit where in one game I threw them forwards with the Steed of Shadows into my opponent, and he had to use all his resources to shoot them off. But they were threatening him, and I was able to put my other stuff up behind. They did stuff. They felt relevant, and they scored a lot as well. And it was really feel good to me. And that was Marauders, who are pretty basic.
So you're enjoying playing with the Chaos then? You're playing more with Chaos in this edition?
I've played 4 games with vampire counts as well.
Oh yeah,
which is the guilty. Although the less said about them, the better, really, for my opponents. That is.
Enjoying the second region.
Oh yes, obviously I was playing with the second region, but quite frankly, I found with them that I was forgetting half of the rules, and I didn't need to remember them all because I had enough rules to destroy my opponent anyway.
Yeah.
So there you go. Because I had so many models that I just forgot about them after a while. I did that thing that VC players do where they just like put dice on the back of their zombie trays, which is just how many extra zombies they've got.
Oh, I see. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And there are just so many of them. And they could just stand there.
Yeah, but isn't there a rule that you've got to produce the models?
Yes. That should be there. They should say. Maybe they should also say.
Yeah, but it was there in 8th, wasn't it? It definitely said that.
It was. So with specifically the Raise the Dead spell and the Law of Undeath, it said you must have these models or the spell does not work. A little bit like how it said on Transformation of Kadon, if you wanted to turn into a mountain chimera, which was the obvious meta thing people didn't do, it says you must have the appropriate model. I mean, there never was a mountain chimera. What are they talking about? So you could go and say, you can't, that doesn't work if you want, but I don't think people would. But yeah, so I have been playing with Chaos. I've been with Wolves of the Sea, playing a list with, I'm going to have a battle report that's going to come out of this Saffron thing. A couple of gigantic spawn, a boring old dragon, and some less boring core. And then the vampires, which are just zombies and screams and necromancers, and that's it. Because I don't think you need anything else. It's just, and I have Graveguard.
Yeah, of course. You got to have Graveguard.
Yeah, with the 3-up armor save, the helm, that means that they like weapon skill about 6 or 7.
And a 5-up regen.
And a 5-up regen and another 5-up regen when you crumble. And they just come back to life in the same way as zombies. And you have 4 necromancers, one of them who has 2 resurrections because of the Scepter of Denoret. And they can all reroll their leadership tests because the Undead BSB says all leadership. I mean, look, it's a certain sort of game, shall we say. A game with only one player in it. But that's not as bad as Cathay, to be honest with you. And that's a whole other.
Okay, so you're not quite the filthiest man in the building.
Well, I think that I have an undead. I have a vampire count's army that was painted by someone else that I've been fixing it up. I've done.
I like the army.
I've done about 15. I've done about 15 zombies. I've got this thing. It's not quite done yet. This is my Mortis engine. I've done a little banner as well.
Oh, you put a banner on it.
It's exactly. She's a bit of all right, isn't she? Exactly. Yes. This is Andromeda Desard, who is a necromancer. Anyway, so I did that, and this could also be a war shrine as well in Chaos as well. I always had this. It's a steam tank with this thing here. This is the bit off the Chaos battering ram from 1984, which I just happened to have. And so I stuck it on here, and I kind of sculpted its hands, not very well. And this is a steam tank, obviously. And this is the head of Peter Hellshit's Manticore. So it's a nice conversion. So I've done that, and I've been doing some stuff with some zombies as well, and bringing these ones from this army that I've got back into the full standard that I want by putting highlights on them and rebasing them and stuff. And I kind of haven't been enjoying that, I guess. Although I've done about 15 now, and I'm starting to get bored. And I need about 150. So what I have done also is I went and bought loads of 3D printed gravestones. That's what you have to do also. And you dry brush all of them, and then the gravestones can become your zombies.
The unit fillers,
And you can have like a sarcophagus, and that's like 6 of them, and you just have to. I mean, that's what they do, right?
That's what they do.
Well, once I played in 8th edition, the esteemed Scott Reed, and he played an army that had it was only zombies. And I think by the end of it, he had
Oh yeah,
400 vast
I've seen
numbers of
that
models
army.
on the
Yeah,
table.
he
Like
didn't
that,
paint it, I don't think.
no, and it wasn't very competitive because it was just a pornographic army. I mean, you don't obviously you just didn't go near the zombies, right? I mean, that was the whole
Yeah,
thing because obviously, why would you? And they
but
were
if there's
just
so
slow.
many, they take up so much space on the
They
table.
do, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
They take up space on the table. The undead guy resurrects so many zombies that then you go in there and win combat by one, and then you push it off the board. That's the it's when his models can't fit, or what he does with his zombies is he resurrects so many of them that they go into marching column instead of being in normal formation. I
Oh
think
yeah.
that's really funny as well as an unintended consequence. That happened to me. That happened to me a few times. Then I can't charge.
So, one of the aspects of the game that's taken a massive hit is the magic system, and it's really
Yes.
changed. I don't want to say in a fundamental way because it's still the same 2d6
Yeah.
system, but it's changed in a way that's kind of a tacit admission that it wasn't designed that well.
Well,
Um,
I think so.
yeah,
But I think the argument for this is that, look, I mean, so they've changed level four wizards from getting +4 to +2, and that's the biggest change. And I mean, and just to give some, I did some just some stats on this. So if you're talking about a spell that's 9 plus, which is a quite common value for a
yeah,
spell, now you need to roll a 7 on 2d6 to get it. Before you
exactly.
need to roll a 5 with a level 4 wizard. So the level 4 wizard now has a 58.3% chance of rolling at least a 7, whereas before they had an 83.3%
Yeah,
chance. I mean, that's an enormous step change. And with that same spell, the level 1 wizard has got a 41.6% chance of getting it. In other words, getting at least an 8 on the
mm,
dice. And the level 4 wizard has got that 58.3%. So the level 4 wizard has got 17% percentage points more chance of getting the spell now, whereas before he had a 42 percentage point extra chance of getting it. So it's really collapsed the difference between the spellcasters and
yeah.
taken away a lot of the nuance of the different magic levels.
And their only kind of mitigation has been to reduce the casting values of a few spells here and there. There are still several spells that are a 10 to cast, which now
Yeah,
is very difficult, and you almost don't want
very
to
hard.
take those spells. Yeah. There are still many of the signature spells that are a 9 to cast. So if you're a level 1 on Demonology, for example,
You need to get
do
an
you
8.
need, yeah,
Yeah.
you need an 8. You're not, I mean, you might just never cast a spell all game.
So I had on my list that I said I had um, two wizards, and they both, because I had magic items, had basically two magic missiles each, and they were needing about an 8 to get them. So I was just reasoning if I have 4 bites of the cherry, I might get 1 or 2.
Yeah.
But absolutely, it's changed. And I think the core point with the magic system is maybe this, that with 2d6, there are only 11 different outcomes you can get on the dice. And some of them are much likelier than others. Like between a 5 and an 8, much more likely than, say, getting a double 1 or a double 6, for example. And so there's a real, spike in the middle of the bell curve. And when they change it by 2, as they've done, that has an enormous effect on making some spells much harder to get than before. And in a magic system that's granular, you need to have several things. One is certain spells that are much harder to get than others that feel as though they have a more decisive impact compared to less powerful ones that are easier, and different levels of wizards interacting with that system. And that the wizards are now mostly the same, and the spells mostly have similar values or 3 different ones. That is not enough variety to be able to express the diversity of effects that is required in a magic system, compared to in 8th edition, where there was so many different manifestations of what could happen with different magic levels, loads of different spell casting values, the broken concentration, the irresistible force mechanic that were much more interesting. And of course, on top of all of that, the fact that you could vary the number of dice you threw at spells and dispelled. As I say, it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but the range of different possibilities and the canvas with which you could express the magic in 8th edition, where it's like having like the basic paint set with 6 paints in it versus being able to mix all of your own paint like a master artist. There is no comparison on that. And as I say, I just think it's too crude. The gearbox doesn't have enough gears in it, unfortunately, to express everything.
Yeah, obviously, I don't want to turn this into a eulogy about 8th edition, but if you're an old world player and you haven't
And
played it,
other editions had
yeah,
this as well in
yeah,
various,
sixth
not just
house,
eighth,
yeah,
not just eighth. Yeah, yeah,
but like I mean, compared to Old World, Eighth has some parts that were more complex and some parts that
yes,
were less complex, right? And so
yes,
a lot of the movement and combat and stuff would feel streamlined from an Old World player going into Eighth,
yes, yes,
but the magic system would feel more complex
much more.
and obviously having a bigger impact on the game as well
Yes,
overall. But it's worth having a go if you haven't tried Eighth because the magic system is so elegant and sophisticated. Just being able to choose how many dice you roll rather than just having a 2d6 system meant that you really had to think tactically about how many dice you threw from each spell and how much of your resources you're using, and also the concept of the miscast and the perfect invocation being on the double six jointly. So it wasn't like a separate double one and double six. They both happened at the same time. And so the more dice you threw, the higher the risk of miscast, but also the higher the chance that you're going to automatically get the spell off. And just it just made for a very interesting
yes.
match.
The other thing, of course, was resource management as well. So you have to. So sometimes, because the winds of magic were very unpredictable, you could end up with 2 dice or 12. You couldn't rely on one particular spell because you might just not get the dice to power it. And usually, the opposition, unless you got the irresistible force, was able to stop one spell that he was really worried about, even a dwarf player, by throwing all his dice at it. So you would usually often get the secondary spell or the tertiary spell, or maybe two tertiary spells. And so you had to look at the game. I mean, certainly some players could just simply get a horrible spell, 6 dice it, get a double six, and then sometimes win a game, occasionally, but usually not really. And it's that resource management aspect, I think, that is the thing that I think I miss the most. I mean, some of the other stylistic changes in Old World I don't like, but it's the resource management I think that's key. And I think you could have that in Old World. You can
Good.
keep the fact you can have a block of power dice, a block of dispel dice that are on the side, and they are determined by maybe how many wizards you have, like in sixth, or some variation with the winds of magic. Use them throughout the turn. It's a bit complicated, but it would enable you to have the magic built in with all the different phases, which is I don't like, but some people do. And it would allow you to keep those aura-based dispel ranges, which is another old world thing, and have resource management. And I don't think too many people who remember old systems of Warhammer would object too much to that.
No,
Apart from
but
that, it
some
would be a little bit more complicated.
exactly. That was exactly
It
the
would
point.
mean you have to think more because in old world, everyone pretty much casts spells whenever they can, including when it's not necessary, and everyone dispels spells because the only downside is a double one, and that's not very likely, and the consequences aren't very bad, and so people just do it automatically. And I think some players quite like the auto aspect of it. They quite like just I roll for my will be done, and then I'm going to roll for the blades of whatever it is. And you just do them, and they're just these abilities that happen at the beginning of the turn, and that's when you don't think about it and you think more about other things. But I don't like that. I do think you should think about magic. I think it's part of the game. I think it should. I think there should be problems with it. I think you should be able to go wrong. I think you should be able have to manage resources. I think that is a lot of missing texture there from Old World that they just mowed down by moving the magic system. And they're seeing some of the chickens, I think, coming home to roost because of the absence of resource management. And they're finding that, level 4 wizards were a bit too good before. Now they're almost the same as level 1 wizards with just one peg down because they've not got enough different pegs to be able to express everything. It's
Yeah,
not because the underlying system is just too basic. It's like a language with like 10 words in it. You can't say what you want, what you mean with it.
yeah. And like other aspects, like the skirmishers, for example, they're trying to patch something that just needs to be rewritten. But
Yes.
I mean, there's no point complaining. I think that there's complexity in other areas of the game which people like. There's simplicity in some areas of the game, like magic, which people like as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't have every phase, every element of the game super complex because then it becomes too difficult. So, magic is where it's taken the hit. But when you look at the changes, like, the casting values have changed. Obviously, that has knock-on effects for some armies that are able to get bonuses to cast. Orcs can get +1 to cast in a unit of orcs. Zinch can get +1 to cast and things like that.
Mortis engine for VC.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
It's big. +1 to cast is massive.
Yeah, yeah, and I think as an Orc and Goblin player, I think it's great. The sort of the magic items and stuff that we have access to as well.
Yeah.
But like for the legacy armies, though, in a way, it's driven a further wedge between the core and the legacy armies because the legacy armies casting values haven't been updated. VC, as you say, they can still stack bonuses and things like that, and so it's kind of it hasn't.
Yeah.
There's an issue there, right? There's an element of the game that hasn't been updated with the 1.5 edition,
Yeah.
and why not? I mean,
this is a broader kind of problem. But yeah, so with the legacy factions, VC is still good, despite the fact their casting values haven't been updated, and despite the fact they've taken away the second Mortis engine stacking. It's still really good despite that. But it feels as though the legacy factions are completely at hostage to the way things just change. Like, they wrote the regen rules stupidly, and so VC just benefited from that. Or they made unit strength critical for scoring, and VC have got zombies, so it's great for them. I mean, they're not being factored into the calculations, whereas many of the other factions are just getting worse and worse, especially because of power creep. And they're not being correspondingly updated. The core rules change that affects them, but then the specific things in their book doesn't change. And the question, as you say, is why not FAQ and change the legacy PDFs? Who are they benefiting by not doing that? It just seems like stupid pride on their behalf to just say, they're competitively legal, we're not supporting them, but here they are anyway, to not even change the casting values to spells, or to even say, we got the base size of the Slan Mage Priest wrong. He can actually go in a unit of Temple Guard. The original Slan Mage Priest model has got Temple Guard carrying him on their shoulder, so the player can place it in a unit of Temple Guard, who, do you know what they do? They guard the temple, which is where the Slan Mage Priest lives. But no, you can't do that because the base is incompatible. I mean, stupid, moronic rules writing. And it requires a whole kind of, this whole square-based legacy patch to do that, rather than just saying, we got the base size wrong. Correction, he's on 60 by 60, not 50 by 50.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all. One line, and that's all. But they don't do that because they say we're not going to update them. That is pig-headed stupidity. And if they want to control the community, like certain persons who write for the Bell of Lost Souls want them to do, then not doing things like that would be a good start.
Right, yeah. And I suppose, you've launched the wider discussion there, which I wanted to segue into. But just quickly on the change for Magic affecting the legacy factions. I mean, all it needs is to drop a few casting values. I mean, obviously there are other changes that have affected VC specifically and stuff like that. But if they dropped a lot of casting values that would tend to cast, but they think, okay, it shouldn't be really hard to cast. They dropped it to a 9, and some have gone to 8 and things like that. Just dropping a few of the casting values would go halfway to ameliorate the changes to the Magic system. It's funny because initially I thought the wedge between the legacy factions and the core factions might come from the match play guide. I thought they might include some kind of faction-based missions or something like that. But it's come from the Magic change, and that caught me blindside. I thought, okay, so they've now updated, and it would have been so easy for them just to update those PDFs.
I just don't see. I think that it's true with the spell values, but there are also, as I say, just thunking changes. The Slan is the worst example. The Screaming Bell is another one. What's the point? I mean, clearly they're wrong, but there is a certain segment of opinion that is so enthralled to everything Games Workshop say. They're literally fundamentalist evangelists that they won't even use their common sense and say, yes, the Slan can go in the unit. I say, I have no time for, I might like some of those people personally, but I have no time for that point of view. I mean, that is literally just obeying for the sake of obeying. The most stupid things. And that is, and look, if you've got people who are so big-headed as that, then Games Workshop need to take the lead and say, your Slan can go in a unit, guys. It's official.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? You talk about the as you say, the evangelists of the Games Workshop. There's kind of separate
Yes.
layers, isn't there? Because obviously there's the Games Workshop employees, and then there's their sort of wider apparatchiks,
Mm.
and then there's the sort of
The
people,
non-commensura, yes, them.
yeah, the nomenclatura, and then there's the people who are not directly in the pay of Games Workshop, but they're receiving free stuff, so they're basically in the pay of Games
Yeah,
Workshop.
they bear the non-commensura too,
Yeah,
yes.
they're the nomenclatura, and then there's the people who want to one day be in the inner circle. They're not quite there
The
yet, but
proto-non-commensura.
right,
Yes, get close
they're
to the
suckling
center.
at the teat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which is what you need to do in all
yeah,
police states and authoritarian regimes. You just need to get closer to the center, right?
right,
That's what
right.
you need to do to go up in the world. Just get into the party. And if
Yeah,
you're not allowed to join the party, queue up outside the party branch for as long as you can that's necessary, or be just a sycophant. You know, but just go and enforce the rules. Be like that cycling dude who
yeah.
goes around trying to get motorists caught so we can enforce like speed limits more. Be like him, yeah. And then eventually, hopefully, the government will say, "Hey, we like you. We'll give you something."
But as you
I'm being facetious, but
yeah,
there
but
is a bit
right.
of
It's like,
this.
look, Games Workshop, right? In this game made in the 1980s,
Mm,
Warhammer Fantasy, it's been going on for decades. It's, in my opinion, got better with every new edition,
uh-huh.
culminating in eighth ed, in my
Yes.
humble view.
Yes.
And then they've just dropped it for a decade
Yes.
and come back and been like, well, here's the new rule set. But they've got to get, if they want to regain control and
Yes.
be that master, they've got to get a lot better at what they're doing. There's too many holes, there's too many gaps that need filling by the community, and that's not a bad thing. And I don't think they necessarily mind, but at the same time, a lot of the change that we've been talking about, it seems like they've kind of seizing power
Yeah, I
simply
think we
by
don't
change.
know. I think the critical thing is with the power question is we don't know whether they want to rule or not. I mean, if they went and made it very clear that they did, that would be one thing. But on a certain level, you know, say back in the 90s, someone would have asked a game designer, "Oh, what do you think about this, this, and this?" And they'll say, "Look, what do you think? Who do you think we are?
Yeah,
You make it up. You know, you're adults, you're grown ups. You know, I'm disappointed when, as Thomas Purinen said, not disappointed when people make up rules. I'm disappointed when you don't make them up. I'm okay, fine." So if they just said something like that, then all of the, you know, the sycophants and the literalists and the evangelists would all just, then we could say, well, Games Workshop want us to make up the rules then. So there you go. We're doing what
yeah,
they say. But if they do want to be power obsessive, if they want everyone to obey the law, make the law understandable so that it can be obeyed. At the moment, it is not, for the most part, understandable. It is a dog's breakfast, and there's nothing. And the only thing that's worse than a police state is a police state where no one knows what the law is,
yeah.
and that's even worse. So then you can't obey. So you just
Or
get
when the law is too complicated that no
yeah,
one obeys it because they don't understand it,
yeah.
and then that kind of undermines the concept of the law as a whole. Yeah,
Exactly. Or the person who obeys the law the most literally is then rises to prominence because they say, well, this is the most swinging interpretation of it, so therefore I must be the. Anyway, look, we're getting into
yeah,
silly realms here, but yeah, but it's not clear. As I say, how far they want to rule the roost of the game, because at the end of the day, this started as a specialist game. I believe what the square-based people say about that, in that they say, well, it was a side project, specialist design studio. Some people were skeptical about it. And so, in a sense, if it was like that, then it would be a little bit like, oh, well, we give this to the community. You know, it's
yeah,
like Necromunda, it's like Mordheim. It should be regarded in that way. But obviously, it's been a bit more successful than they expected it to be. That is certain. And so then there are these questions that are appearing that are the same ones as are appearing in Age of Sigmar and 40K,
right.
because it's, as I say, is serious business. And now they're maybe having to kind of retrofit some of that paradigm of control into something that they thought was a throwaway side project, but it was a bit better than that.
Yeah,
And it was a bit more successful, not because I think their game was so good, but just because Warhammer Fantasy has still a lot of supporters. And it, rather than confirming that Old World is such a great version of the game, what it more confirms is that they were idiots to blow up the damn game in the first place, because there were so many people who loved Warhammer Fantasy of any edition. And that's why
Indeed.
it's popular, not because Old World's good, but because Warhammer Fantasy is good.
And on that note, I've got a couple of quotes from you for to read out to you now. I've got a
Oh,
couple of
yes.
old rule books with me.
Oh, very good.
And I could pick this. There's quite a big selection actually, but I've just picked a couple. So I've got the third ed rule book here,
Yeah.
and then I've got a quote here also from the fifth ed rule book. So I'll start off with this one from the third ed.
Yeah.
And this, for anyone who has the book at home, this is on page 38 about the most important rule. Now, the most important rule is in the Old World rule book as well, of
Yes.
course. I don't want to leave that out, where it talks about rules, disagreements, and so on. And that goes into that here. But there's this first paragraph here, which is a little bit different. So the most important rule in the whole book is this. The GM is always right. Now, obviously, in third ed, they had a games master. So you didn't play
Yes.
games with just two people. You also had a games master there as well, which is a separate discussion all on its own, but I'll leave that for now. Warhammer is a complex game which often entails complicated situations. Sometimes a situation will defy strict interpretation. Occasionally, the rules may appear to advocate a rather dubious course of action. This is unfortunate, but inevitable. As designers, we try to anticipate situations that might occur, but the permutations are too varied to cover, even in the most complete play testing. So the GM should be prepared to use his common sense at all times and may overturn or invent rules as he sees fit.
Yeah.
And that last bit there about overturning or inventing rules using your common sense kind of makes me think that, we shouldn't play with the second regen, with TO,
No.
maybe not the GM, but the tournament organizer, right? Should just say, look, we're going to use our common sense, or at least people shouldn't be embarrassed, well, not embarrassed, people shouldn't be pressured to follow the letter of the rules, and not and people should be able to look, we're going to use our common sense, we're going to create this comp system, we're going to change the rules in this way.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be controversial,
Yes. I mean, look, the third ed rulebook has got that. There are many iterations that say similar of that over the years. I mean, I had the Pyrenean quote. There's a really good one from the fifth ed rulebook, which has got Priestley signing off about talking about officialdom in the Warhammer hobby.
Yeah.
That's also one that's quite seminal in that way. I mean, and look, I think the thing with this is that those sorts of ways of thinking about the hobby from the pre-internet age, it's just a complete anathema to just sort of do things, obviously to do things like the second regen, which obviously weren't intended. And as I say, that's so for people of that who remember games from that time, it just the modern way of thinking about it just doesn't make any sense. But that all goes back to why Warhammer Fantasy is a Rebels game, and it's partly that, but it's also partly because they blew up the 8th ed system and people had to make their own games. So there were two generations of Rebels, those dudes who were reading that, and then a bunch of people a long time later who had to. So it does feel a bit artificial to me, the whole kind of Rebel thing. But the argument is that it fractures the community if you all go and do your own thing. As I say, I don't think that argument stands up to much scrutiny. I can see a few points in its favor, but that's what people say.
Yeah, I mean, so you've just obviously that was the quote that I was going to read out from the fifth ed rulebook, so I could get into that later if you like, but absolutely, and I think that the tournament organizers generally will have their own tournament pack anyway, right? When you go to an event, they'll say, look, these are the house rules, or these are the rulings that we're going to make for this event, and because there are lots of, as you say, because they've designed the rule set in a way that people are going to play it differently in different places, you do need someone to say, this is how we're going to play the game.
I think that, to be fair, with the second regen especially, which everyone knows is a bit silly, that has been a question I've seen being asked of TOs. Are we playing the second regen or not? And they'll either say yes or no. Yeah. Usually, if they're an undead player, they'll say yes. Otherwise, they'll say no. Something like that, really. But anyway, so there is that, and I do think that with the match play guide missions and deciding which ones you choose, we are in a sense maybe slightly officializing a degree of slack for a TO. As I say, I think we're fractured anyway, regardless of what happens, because for a lot of reasons, but also the fact that we're going to be deciding on which missions and things to use, and because the rules are unclear, and because we need to decide,
Yeah, lots of reasons.
this and the legacy and the whole legacy issue as
Well,
well,
that's the issue I was going to bring
and the
up.
legacy
Yeah.
patch. It is by
That's one of
definition.
the main ones that's caused a lot of discussion, I would say. To what extent do we use fan-based rules for the legacy factions? Because many people see it as fundamental. As you say, things like can your slan go in the unit? Can your screaming bell be pushed by clan rats? Is fundamental
Yeah.
to the look and feel of the legacy factions.
Yes.
And then there's the power-based issue, like to what extent do you want the legacy factions to be capable of competing on the same level as the core factions? And both those issues are kind of solved in a quite conservative way, I'd say, by that renegade pack
I
that
think the first of them is solved more than the second. I still think
yeah.
the power level of the legacy factions is still pretty weak,
Yeah, but
even
you wouldn't want to
after
go
that.
too far, would you? Because
No,
yeah, you
the
want to keep.
moment they go and say, "Oh, they went and did like a buff, and then Lizardmen actually started being good," that there's
Yeah,
not in that would be more politically unacceptable at that point.
yeah,
I don't think that should be the case. I would be totally okay with Lizardmen being as good as Bretonia. I'm fine by me. I don't see why
yeah.
Bretonians have to be better, but it would be more controversial. Um, and I do think that power level thing is important, because it might not matter on a casual level, but on the internet, discourse, which is so heavily based on competitive play. Look, our friend, a certain writer from the Bell of Lost Souls, Abe Apfel, who is, generates a lot of journalism in this space, went and said, oh, only 20% of the games on old world rankings are from legacy factions, so therefore they're not very popular anyway. Obviously, it's a daft argument, because one of the reasons they're not very popular in competitive ratings is because, exception of VC, who are popular, surprise, surprise, they're not being played because A, their rules are shit, and B, they're not very good. And so that's why they're not being played. And that's why power balance is an issue, because it also has lots of, in terms of getting into the hobby, if you never see Skaven being played, then it's unlikely a new guy will say, oh, I'm going to collect Skaven now. It's just the pathways are just more limited. And there are some people who a certain faction might speak to them. Like if they love dinosaurs, they might like lizardmen, for example. There are lots of reasons why you might like these. And I don't like that being blocked by the factions obviously being just rubbish. It just puts people off.
It is a potential stumbling block for them in that they've kind of underestimated how emotionally attached people are to the legacy factions, and they just think that, well, they can kind of, we've done rules from them, we've done our sort of service to the community, and now we can phase them out. They might have that attitude, but I think they're in, whether Games Workshop likes it or not. The legacy factions are in, even if we have to create our own.
No one thinks they should be ruled out.
Exactly.
I mean, even those like the Team England kind of events. I was watching one of a video on Dowie After Dark the other day, and I haven't watched it all, but he was talking about vampire counts obviously being in the legacy factions are in with that. They're now just part of the game, and that's an international event where there's going to be more media attention and all insofar as there is with this, and they're still allowing the legacy factions. The only people who don't allow them are Games Workshop at their official events. So that they lost control from the beginning of that decision. I mean, that was a very, very bad idea, and they haven't been able to backpedal. They should be releasing second arcane journals for the legacy factions, but should replace the original one.
I'll just read out this quote on officialdom, because some people listening to us now might not have heard it before.
Yeah.
And this is obviously on the back page of the fifth ed rulebook. Rick Priestley signing off, and he says, before signing off, I'd like to make a plea about queries, questions, and officialdom in the Warhammer hobby. I've always taken the view that Warhammer is inherently adaptable, that the rules and ideas in the game are a springboard to better and greater things. I would openly encourage players who wish to develop the game to suit themselves to invent and change rules to their own taste, and to explore their own ideas about rules, modeling, scenery, and background. Those who play Warhammer regularly will soon acquire the experience that enables players to sort out rules queries to their own satisfaction. Most gaming groups evolve their own way of doing things, resolving unforeseen circumstances in an agreeable manner, and inventing new rules to suit themselves. This is what makes gaming such an absorbing and fascinating hobby. Indeed, Warhammer would be all the poorer were it not for the influx of ideas and innovation from its many devotees.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what the Renegade Pack is, right? It's devotees to the game
Yep.
who have injected new ideas, thanks to Val from the Square base for spearheading that.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we need, isn't it? We can do it ourselves, you know?
It's exactly as Rick Priestley would have intended it to be. But of course, this quotation comes from, before the age of officialdom. And at that point, I mean, that quote particularly is the one that I and others have quoted before, because it is very, very far removed from, points, patches, and, ask wanting Games Workshop to rule the answer for more or less any question. And where this slave-like obedience kind of came from, is a sort of a debate in and of itself. But I think it relates to esportification, internet meta, and the moving away of the game from being something which was kind of a hobbyist game based on gentlemen's agreements. And Eighth Ed had its part to play in all this. Eighth Ed had technically correct rules that could be played by competitive players who didn't need to be gentlemen. And then there was, arguments about officialdom. The Eighth Ed crowd weren't born rebels. They became rebels because they had to be, because the game was blown up. In the last couple of years of Eighth, when there was no support coming out of GW, there was an argument about how far the community should make things up. These, say, the sycophants were kind of in town then as well, but they had no choice because the king left the throne. And so they had to become part of the rebellion because there was no ruler. So things have changed in that way, but there is a massive pedigree to I think that the legacy patch and stuff, it's probably, for those who haven't really looked into this, it sounds like it's very controversial, and it is because of what people have made of it. But some people looking at it would just shrug their shoulders and think, why is that controversial? It's not. I mean, the changes are incredibly conservative. It's more about the principle of that someone can stand up and say, we're going to do this change, and not be accused of nepotism, favoritism, all this kind of stuff, which is, of course, the big problem with comp, that some people comp it in a way that helps them and their own armies. And I don't think that's the case with the legacy faction stuff, because I don't think that anyone is saying that Val is changing this to benefit himself. I don't think anyone is saying that.
No. And it's not just him making it up himself as well. I mean, he's taking
lots of people.
Yeah, lots of people. And with the 1.5 edition, though, it's almost like Games Workshop is seizing back power, maybe intentionally or not. But
yes,
when the rules stay static for longer, it opens up more space for more acceptance of fan-based rules. Whereas if Games Workshop changes, the match play guide, the launch of Cathay, the FAQ all at once, any sort of rebellion that was in the pipeline is now just has to be binned, and you've got to just see how the game plays again. And so it puts on hold any kind of rebellion, doesn't it? Because it's like, let's throw all the chips up in the air, and everyone has to see where they land and see what's going on before they can make a comp system.
It does, because for there to be a real rebellion, you have to have moderates on your side. This is the thing, at the end of the day, the Vanguard Revolutionary Party needs the support of the middle class. It has forever been so. And this is my way of sort of saying that, you need to have the moderate opinion in there. Now, obviously, if Games Workshop don't produce the answers to questions, and there are obviously gaping holes, then many people will say, well, of course we need a bit of a rebellion, because otherwise the game just isn't very, very good if we don't, or it's clearly inadequate. If they do change things and there's this continual flux all the time and everyone not knowing where things land, then there is, of course, a strong group of people that will say, hey, let's just wait until things settle before we decide whether we're continuing to rebel or not. Now, I think rebellion should happen from first principles. I think it's very obvious that the Grand Cathay rules are cooked like a goose, and that there are obvious problems with the game. It takes not very long to realize that. And there's nothing wrong with rebellion because I think the gamers being in control is better than them being in control from first principles. In other words, I would opt for anarchy above totalitarianism. And I don't think that that is the attitude of most players. They will
Right.
they will accept the anarchy if the totalitarian system is obviously deficient. But if it seems to be tackling the problems, that they will not agree with the anarchist, which is a perfectly reasonable position.
Yeah.
But you see, I think they'll always be fixing it and not very well. And you'll just have to eat dog breakfast every day if you don't rebel. And if that's okay, dog's breakfasts have all of the right kind of nutritions and vitamins in them. They're just a complete mess, but the dog thinks they taste great.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you use your sort of political analogies there, isn't it? It's like having a general election every 5 years and you having the feeling that you're changing something.
Yeah.
I mean, if they were to have an FAQ every 6 months and release a few more arcane journals and change the rules slightly and or release new missions and stuff like that, you might think, oh, it's getting fixed.
Yeah.
It's changing, and we don't need to patch it because Games Workshop's doing that.
True. It is different, though, sentimentally from between 2013 and 2015. They went silent on 8th. There was this fear of the sudden silence. And the thing is at least they're talking. And there is that feeling, clearly it's alive. Clearly there's chat. And I think that reassures quite a lot of people who might remember that. Even if I think a lot of stuff that's coming out of them is suboptimal. But at the same time, it's there and it exists. And there's a slight feeling of, oh, well, if the fans go and rebel too much, then they might just say, naughty, we're not going to support your game anymore. There's this sort of feeling that, oh, well, they might take it away from us. Or if people, which include you and me, too negative about things, oh, well, we will have to be positive and kind of have a big kind of party and get behind everything. You see, I don't think that's right at all. I think critical analysis is getting behind something. You don't need to just give unqualified support to a thing to support it. If it ever got to the point where people like you and I were putting people off getting into the hobby, then that would be a problem. But I don't think that's true. I think it helps create chat and it helps create critical discourse, which promotes engagement amongst thinking men.
I totally agree. Yeah, I've seen that criticism on my YouTube channel a few times. Words to the effect of, you're not helping because you're being too negative about it. And while I agree that perhaps in the circle of friends that you have and the people you talk to, I'm not helping those people get into Warhammer The Old World, there are plenty of people who are very critical and don't want to play Old World because they don't like it. And those are the people I'm speaking to. So I'm speaking to a different set of people. So I am helping. I'm just not helping people that you're talking to.
The thing that I think isn't perhaps realized for those who have, sat through this thus far and are watching, on the spectrum of old world commentary, the stuff clearly on the more critical end.
Yeah.
One thing that is perhaps not realized is how far players in the 8th Ed crowd and the 9th Age to boot just simply do not like old world, but alienated from the start, thought that it was clunky, unbalanced and silly. And the moment, and they hear stuff only through a very selected media stream. And I can tell you what they've heard about 1.5, hot air balloons. That's all they know. Oh, it's busted. It's silly. Games Workshop of latest fanboy, have gone and spaffed off in their pants with Grand Cathay. It's all a load of, that's what they know. And so that group of people are very negative about it. And in my opinion, wrongly negative for the most part. But when you look at it from that side of the fence, from the 8th edition 9th Age crowd and what that game was, it colors your vision very considerably. And as I say, we speak to you, dear viewer, as people who are part of these crowds and hear those other people. And so if you think we're critical, then we're not compared to them.
Yeah, right. I mean, let's say you take the event that we ran for 8th edition in London back in May, right? We had 35 people or something at the event. Out of the people there, we're definitely on the pro old world side of the event. Most people there's a chunk of them who've never played it at all because they just think the rules are rubbish. There's a very big chunk of players there, probably even most of the people there, played a few games when it first came out and then thought, actually, I don't like this, and going back to 8th edition. And then when 1.5 came around, they thought, okay, this is a little bit better. Maybe I'll dip my toes in again, but it's not quite enough to get them to go in with 2 feet, right?
There's a swing group there without question.
Yeah,
And
and
I
so
think that's there with Sick Dead as well, to be honest with you. I think that there are, and when we're talking about a quite small number of players overall, the legacy groups of people who play 8th and 6th and 9th age, we might be talking about, I don't know, 1,000 people or something. I know that sounds tiny, but we're also talking about a quite niche product here. So it's not as small as you might think. So yeah, and I'm sure that there are many other people who think like that as well. And what we're seeing is just a cross section of something broader. But they are there and they can be captured. They can be captured. There are new players as well, of course. It's not just the existing people, but the existing people I still feel are most of the market because fantasy was nearly as big or as big for a time in 40K going back, especially in other countries.
yeah.
Places like Poland, for example. I was talking with a Polish guy called Michael, who I played at the Saffron Slam, and he was telling me about what fantasy had been like in Poland in the early noughties. Bigger than 40K. Not by much, but by enough. And one of the things there is that in Poland, swords and sorcery fantasy is just very popular, maybe just from a cultural starting point, just a bit more so. And so there's a lot of people who dabbled in this in the past who are all there. And, so that they get it right, there's the opportunity for them to, stick their nose around the door. And 1.5 has made them take another look at it, I think. But I think what really would be 2.
Yeah.
Old World 2 or the 10th edition of Warhammer Fantasy, which is really what it ought to be called. That would make them look again. So there are opportunities there, and I think that the conversation is moving, and I think that that's the thing that's the most positive about it. This isn't ossifying. If anything, it's skedaddling around quite a lot.
Oh yeah.
As the mole is whacked and the bar of soap is sliding all over the place, and that's exciting. Although it's also a bit off-putting for people who are slightly on the outside of it.
So have you played many games against Cathay?
I played one game against Cathay, and that was enough.
Was it a painted army?
Yeah, it was a painted army. It was, I would go as far as to say, fairly well painted, or painted in an economical way, shall we say, that would enable you to paint. The Cathay army I played had only 2 hot air balloons. It had 4 longmas, though, and 2 cannons, and it was a very dialed-back Cathay list. And yes, there is a problem with Cathay, and those who say, oh, no, there's not a problem with it. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe we need more data. Look at the data. They've got a 70% win rate, and that's with lots of people who might not even know what they're doing with them.
So I actually haven't played Cathay yet, and so I don't want to
You're going to enjoy yourself when you do.
Well, yeah. I mean, I want to keep an open mind. I don't want to sort of say I definitely agree with this point of view. I mean, my initial impression of the book is that it is a very powerful army. But there was this chap that came to the event that I went to several weeks ago, called Jack. Really nice guy. If you're listening to the podcast, Jack, leave us a comment. He owns a 3D printing company, so maybe you can plug your company in the comments. And he's 3D printed this Cathay army, contrast painted it, banged it out on the table and he had 5 balloons, right?
Yes.
And I got chatting to him and I said, why did you bring 5 balloons to the event?
Yeah.
And
it's like a birthday party, right? You go and you have lots of balloons. The more the better.
Well, he's got a 3D printer, so he's got all the toys, right? He's got all the armies. He can make an army like that and put it on the table quickly. So he's having fun. He's experimenting, and he basically said, "Look, this is probably the last time I'm going to be able to put this many balloons on the table." And it is quite shocking for me as someone who I never really played Warhammer competitively while it's been a live game before, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I played it casually in 4th and 5th. I played 8th Ed competitively after it was been discontinued by Games Workshop.
Yes.
And so this kind of world that we're in at the moment, where a new faction is released and already it's being comped before most people have even played with the army at all, before anyone's really painted up an army fully and played with it. And already it's like max two balloons at an
Yep.
event, and whatever other comp they come up with. It just seems like does Games Workshop understand that's going to happen? Or
Well, one thing I would say about the balloon comp coming fast would be thumbs up.
yeah, it'd be good.
There is an obvious problem with the balloons, and the community has acted, even including some of its more servile elements have acted and said, well, this is a problem, because it only takes one game against the balloons to understand why they're so problematic. That too is clearly enough. And games, I mean, I fought two, and heaven forfend what five would be like. I literally have absolutely, I mean, it might just be the case that it gets to a certain level of stupidity and just stuff is dead, and so it doesn't matter whether he's got 3 or 10. But still, and they have comped it, and absolutely with the balloon, specifically the balloon, 135 points, 7 wounds, toughness 5, 4 up armor save, 5 shots that always hit on 3s. One of them hits on a 2 that do D3 plus 1 strength 4 hits, and a firebomb which hits about 50% of the time and is a large strength 5 blast AP2. Goodbye infantry. You charge the damn thing. If you, first of all, it can always shoot at you, and it does about on average about 10, 11 strength 4 hits on you before you even get in. Then it's unbreakable as well. So if it wins combat, which it sometimes does because of its stand and shoot, despite not being able to do much in the way of attacks, or if it loses combat, it can disengage, which means it falls back in good order and you can only follow it up, which means you don't catch it. And then it just flies somewhere else and does the same thing again. And it's very non-interactive. And it's just obviously far too good for its points. And yeah, I don't think Games Workshop, maybe they did realize it because they produced the Sky Lantern model and they wanted to sell them. And yeah, I'm sure the designers were told, you're making Cathay powerful, but make the balloon especially powerful. I'm sure they probably were told that, and they went too far. And now the community is, going and comping them very quickly. And that's a good thing, because even with the Green Knight, they didn't really do that. I'm thinking about other stuff, but the balloon has been Balloon-ageddon has occurred, and it's been so bad that they felt they were forced to.
It's a lovely model. I don't think I'd want to paint more than 1 or 2 of them.
No, I think painting more than 1 would just be too difficult. I mean, on an aesthetic level, and this goes maybe into just Cathay in general, I don't like the miniatures aren't to my taste, although I do have more time for the balloon. And the internal artwork in the Cathay Army book as well, that should have a mention as well. Just the black and white artwork in the Army book. It's good. It captures something. Cathay feel as though they belong, in my view. They feel as though they're part of the Warhammer world. I don't like the lore for various reasons, but aesthetically, it feels right. And they've got a lot right aesthetically. And I do think the models do capture that Imperial kind of China aesthetic. And the Sky Lantern is, well, look, I mean, you have Chinese wish lanterns, of course. I mean, it's a bit silly, really. I mean, it's like an air balloon that's a wish lantern, but something about it, cheesy though it is, actually really works. And I just think it's just really cool and dials into that whole Eastern mysticism. And I think that the Sky Lantern would be very well received by Western and Eastern audiences. I mean, from an aesthetic perspective, not from a gaming perspective. I'm sure it's been comped everywhere in any language.
Yeah. And there's been things like this in 40k, right? I mean, I don't follow 40k, but I've heard stories about a new army book getting released and then getting comped before anyone's even played with it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the thing with that is that you've got people literally in a laboratory almost kind of testing it.
Yeah.
With 40k. Now, with Old World, I am surprised it came out that fast because, look, I play competitively a lot. I've only fought Grand Cathay once. And some people, when they're playing online, have played Cathay 10 or 20 times. And then the players who are playing with Cathay as well, who you would think would have been a lobby against comping it, somehow, and a consensus has emerged from this hothouse, if I want to call it this, that this is a problem.
Mm.
And that hothouse is there. And in a sense, it's got its own discourse. This goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, that goes beyond anything that other players are hardwired into. And so you've got comp immediately appearing before people have really played with them. And so I can understand, Jack, in a sense, with his 5 balloons, thinking, well, I've got my 3D printer. I quite like the idea of balloons. They're probably just going to get banned, not because I play games and they're obviously a problem, but just because somebody out there who's played a zillion games in the hothouse says they're a problem, and then everyone copies them. Which is, it would be nice if people drew their own conclusions. Let me put it like that. But I don't think you need to face the balloons very often to realize what's wrong with them.
Yeah.
I think it's something that people should experience once.
Yeah, I'd like to. I want to play against Cathay.
Our friend Mark Noffels, the co-organizer of London Legends with us, played another mutual friend gamer in our circles called Drew, very experienced Bretonnian player, with a Cathay army where he used cups of tea to represent his 2 hot air balloons and other stand-ins, and blew Drew off the board, being a quite casual player who didn't really know the rules that well. So, so this is what can happen.
Yeah,
it's like a driverless car, guys. Cathay, you'll be beaten by your dog over breakfast if the dog uses the hot air balloons, probably.
So do you want to have a little chat about the law then? Because
yes,
we don't have to get too sort of political, but I've got the Arcane Journal in my hands. Perhaps I could just read out a few quotes from it. This
is the Cathay Arcane Journal here, guys.
Yeah. So look, it starts by talking about an empire in the east. So Grand Cathay is rightly counted amongst the largest and most prosperous of human nations in all the known world. A land of bustling cities, great expanses of fertile farmland, towering mountain ranges that reach towards the heavens above. But the size of its territory or number of citizens is not what sets it apart from its contemporaries. Rather, what distinguishes the empire of the celestial dragon from the nations of the old world is the harmony and unity of its people and their masters. For where other nations are riven by strife, born of the jealousy and greed of unworthy rulers, Grand Cathay knows no such turmoil or dissent. And it then goes on to say, other nations are blighted by warfare, their people ever fearful and driven to jealousy guard their meager possessions and hoard what little temporal power they possess. Cathayans are not so mean of spirit. They are people united in purpose, rightly proud of their great nation and its powerful rulers. Cathayans are ever diligent in their work, always considerate of the needs of their neighbours and elders, and safe in the certain knowledge that their masters are likewise ever mindful of their subjects' contentment. And such peace and harmony comes not from a cowed population. The people of Grand Cathay are bold and courageous warriors, and ever curious seekers of knowledge. No, the tranquility enjoyed by the people of the celestial dragon's eternal realm stems from the nature of its rulers. For Grand Cathay is an empire ruled by dragons in more than name.
Well, what word do you want me to say? I don't know what the Chinese word is for bollocks, but I think that would be pretty much what it would be. And I'll just say it in English because I think that's still understandable. Well, rightly, as they like the word rightly, just in case you were thinking that was what the Grand Cathayans thought about themselves. No, dear readers, you were told that it rightly is the case that they have heavenly harmony and people who have such benevolent rulers that they voluntarily enslave themselves without being enslaved because their rulers are just so great. And they know that despite the fact the ruler is a dragon god, he understands all of the wishes of the Cathayans. And also, Cathay is an empire, right? It uses the word empire, and yet, when all the provinces were being collected by the emperor's children with his dragons, all of them loved being colonized so much that they went from being an empire to the most unified nation in the world. So never mind about all of the other races in the old world who weren't empires. Now we have an empire, which, as I say, voluntarily self-colonized, and now is more united than anyone else's because of the harmonic convergence between its subjects and its rulers. How brown a tongue do you want to have with that? Really, guys. We could go on a bunch of sort of whinges here, but look,
I mean,
it's
look,
not interesting to have lore where it's just so obviously perfect. All of the other Warhammer factions have got their problems with them, even the good ones, and that's one of the things that makes them interesting. And Cathay don't
yeah,
have any downsides; they're just perfect.
yeah, and obviously, if they're human beings, they need to have downside. That's what makes human beings interesting. When they say they go out of their way, don't they, to say other nations greed, jealousy,
Yeah,
power hungry. But that's what human beings are. I mean, if either you're humans or are you tyrannids where you're all part
even
of some kind of
elves
hive
and
mind?
dwarves have that problem, right?
Yeah,
And they're not human. And
yeah,
these are just humans. I think the problem is with this is that they have a god who is also their ruler and has always been their ruler. So there's no mysticism in Cathay. And this is based on Imperial China. Of course, there should be mysticism. This is integral to the lore or the history of what you're drawing upon here. And yet, by having their ruler as a god who doesn't need to be worshipped because he exists, you don't have any. So the temples in Grand Cathay are not temples based on the belief in something. They're just places where people just go and obey because God is real and he's all knowing.
yeah,
So in a sense, there isn't that sense of there being anything mystical and beyond, because everything is just there in full view. And that there's, as I said, there's no God because he's just the ruler. And I think that's just a really, really bad idea.
yeah.
No
It's a
other
bad
Warhammer
idea.
races are ruled by gods. That's right, isn't it? They're not ruled by them. Some of the gods are a bit more interventionist, but they're
Well,
not actually ruled by them.
maybe with the exception of demons of chaos, maybe. Yeah,
Yeah, but bloodthirsters or greater demons do have their own autonomy, right? Even though it's quite hard for them to disobey their god.
yeah,
Yeah, that's probably more true with them, but I still think it's not quite the same.
yeah.
And there are four different gods as well who will argue with each other. So that
Oh,
whereas
yeah.
there's only one god.
Yeah, I mean the concept of God, at least in my opinion, is that you have free will because you can choose not to follow your God. And it's funny because it goes into that in
It
the
talks about free will, yeah.
in page 10 and 11. It even says the folk of Grand Cathay serve not because they are compelled to do so out of fear or lack of free will. They serve because when faced with beings as wise, ancient, and majestic as the dragons, and when shown the belief those eternal rulers have in the wit, wisdom, and goodness of spirit, how could those subjects do anything other than throw themselves completely into the service of their emperor? Now,
Right.
I mean, human beings would naturally be power hungry. They would naturally want to be
Yeah.
the emperor and, like they do in the High Elves, subjugate the dragons and ride them, rather than serve the dragons. I mean,
Yeah.
are the High Elves kind of not living in harmony with the dragons because they ride the dragons, and whereas the Cathayans don't ride the dragons?
I think the problem is, as you say, if you're going to have free will and believe in something, there has to be something to believe in. When something is just demonstrably perfect,
Yeah,
then you're not believing in it because you're just obeying it. You're just
yeah,
existing with it. I mean, it's the supercomputer that never makes any mistakes. And unless you have a desire, which is expressly not said in the Cathayan book, to govern yourself because you want to make your own mistakes and because you want sovereignty over yourself and because you don't like those dragon masters because they're dragons and you're people, they don't have that though. They're not, there isn't a kind of humanity first movement in Cathay. That would have been something that would have been, there are so many just bits of texture they could have put in there. So for example, they could have had, as I say, something between the people and the dragons. You've got this thing about there being an omnipotent ruler who doesn't make mistakes, but yet there being a potential issue with that, especially because the Dragon King just disappears for like years at a time in his temple when he's contemplating stuff. The absent emperor, as it says, that would have been interesting. You could have had arguments between the emperor's children, the nine dragons. That would have been pretty cool. You could have had there being, I don't know, maybe an argument about, say, regional groups in Grand Cathay versus the throne. I mean, the Empire has got that. That would have been a bit more politically sensitive there, though. You might have been thinking about Xinjiang in Tibet and all the rest of it, but never mind. That would have been interesting. You could have had an argument between maybe a mystical kind of priesthood and people who are on the scientific modernizing kind of end. There could have been lots of internal things you could have put in Cathayan society that I think would have added a lot of texture, but they've flattened the lot just to have this. And I think it's just a bit of a disgrace, really. And it's also just, it's really just not taking advantage of the rich kind of lore that you could have had. And again, without getting into the politics of this, look, the emperor, what's he called? The celestial dragon, what's he called? Zheng Shang. Is that it? I wrote his name down somewhere. So he's clearly based historically on the first emperor of China, the guy who unified China. And this first emperor figure is regarded in China as being a momentous figure, but also a very brutal one as well. His legacy is mixed. There's the fantastic illustration of the Celestial Empire there from the Emperor from the Grand Cathay book. So what I'm saying is that already the guy who this is based on has a very mixed reputation as it is. You didn't need to just make this, hagiographical. It wasn't necessary. You could have had there being potential flaws in him, or him being really brutal, for example, in establishing his rule, or him just disappearing into the stars and maybe not having the right, or being absent from his children. There could be all sorts of things you could have had in there without upsetting a potential market. This guy is not, he certainly isn't Chairman Mao, and he's certainly not Xi Jinping. The first emperor is a figure who everyone is already used to having a very mixed opinion on. So I don't think they needed to, as I say, be so brown nosy with the whole imperial China stuff. That's not. I don't think they were going to offend anyone's sensibilities if they did it in a way that preserved all the cultural majesty, but also accepted that, sure, there could be all sorts of problems in this fantasy universe, just as there were lots of problems in imperial China, which the Communist Party would also agree with as well, because obviously they're not imperial China. Anyway, so these are some of the things that annoy me about Cathay. It's just, the lore just seems like just a silly sop.
But then again, it's just a game. Games Workshop's a multinational corporation.
Yeah.
Want to get their foot in the door. Maybe they'll, change the tone of it as things progress, and a darker side will emerge to
maybe
the Cathayan lore.
And maybe they've done. Maybe they've done their market research. They're sensitive about not being received well by a potentially very large Chinese market who might buy their products, and they're gun shy about that, and I understand why that is. And maybe Cathay might be I haven't read much about this, but the tiny bit that I have read about Cathay and its reception in China has been overwhelmingly positive. It's the models, the look, the aesthetic. It's, as I say, it's a Western interpretation of Eastern mysticism, but I think they've got that right from an aesthetic point of view. And maybe having got that right, they don't want to spoil the brew by being a bit hammy with some of the kind of the lore, or doing something that maybe is not hammy, because it is hammy, that offends anybody. And so, if this is a successful bid to make Warhammer fantasy big in the East, then that's a price worth paying for hammy lore, as far as I'm concerned. that I would say, because it would be great if the game grew globally.
Yeah. I'd love to see peasant models, though, like Chinese peasants. That would be pretty cool.
Yes, that's true, because the Jade Warriors are quite well equipped. There aren't like sort of levy kind of people, because it doesn't say anything about the population, does it, in the Grand Cathay lore? It doesn't say anything about the fact that they love their rulers. There's not a thing about all them being very poor or primarily agricultural,
No, I think it's just more the motor currently, anyway, at least with this journal, just based on the kind of expeditionary ships to the old world, and therefore it's not the peasants who are going, it's the elite units that are going.
I suppose so. I think the thing is that because I'm quite kind of, I like Chinese, I'm interested in Chinese history. I find Eastern mysticism very appealing. I just feel that perhaps there are so many things they could have drawn upon, and they could still draw on to add more life and darkness into this rather than presenting this harmony land, which is what you might call it. I mean, even use the term harmony, by the way, guys, which is, of course, was a Chinese Communist Party slogan under Hu Jintao. That's the hilarious thing. The word harmony was everywhere in China. Harmony. Although what that specifically meant in that case was people not getting too rich too quickly when other people weren't. You know, when you have a land where everything is changing very fast, there are people that can be left behind. And so having harmony between the social structures, that was more what it meant rather than the suppression of dissent. But anyway, it's the same term. Although I don't mind the use of the term harmony and the idea of there being a kind of a balance between lots of things, because that's quite baked into the mysticism. But I suppose the thing is that while I've been a bit ranty about this, I really like that they've got Cathay in.
Yeah.
And I think there's loads of cool stuff that they can do with it. And the fact that it is also cool might mean that people, as I say, don't agree with the directions that they've taken, because there's such a box of incredibly evocative stuff that they can draw upon. And
I generally like the look and feel of the army. The models aren't quite to my taste. I don't see myself collecting it, but it's got a great look and feel to it. I think there's plenty they could develop there. I think they will. I mean, I haven't played Total War, but I think they're going to have like archers or handgunners or something like that. And
you would think some black powder foot troops, musketeers or something. But I love in general though the old world. I mean, the actual setting of it. There are nations that we know nothing about that potentially are really cool, and of course, because they're adjacent to real world history, there's a huge amount to draw upon, and you can turn a bit of mysticism in there as well, as obviously it's easy to do with the dragons, and I think spiritual stuff they didn't do so well with Cathay. But anyway, what about Araby, for example? I mean, we've got Egypt, obviously, and we've got some North African influence. But what about Central and Southern Africa? That could also be incredibly cool. What about the equivalent? Oh, what is the equivalent of Arabian nations called? I know we've sort of, what's it called in Chaos? I can't remember what it's called in the old world. But that, for example, you could draw on having the Near East as well. I know you've got Chaos Dwarves. We've got some of that as well in a way, but there are many different, and then other parts of Europe we don't know anything about as well, like Stala, Antillia. Oh, and Kislev, obviously. Kislev's the obvious one, but I think we'll see Kislev.
Yeah, I think we'll see Kislev. Yeah,
because there's precedent there, and as I say, broadening the Warhammer world and embracing the fact that this is based on the real world, I really like. Because some of the Age of Sigmar people, said, "Oh, it's a derivative, generic lore. It's in the shadow of Tolkien and you're just copying real world history. That's just too generic." And as I think that couldn't be more, well, it's right factually, but it's wrong in sentiment, because I think real world history is an incredibly powerful place to start fantasy. And you can do so many cool things with historic stuff. And fantasy has always done this. And I love that they're doing it with Cathay.
Yeah, but yeah, it does politicize things a little bit, and people want to draw parallels with real life maybe a bit more than is necessary.
They probably do. I think if it's places like Russia and China, it is like that.
Yeah.
Although in reality, Imperial China ain't the same as communist China, and Russia under ancient czars is not the same as Vladimir Putin, and so people shouldn't draw those kind of analogies, because the cultural resonance that they're drawing upon aren't the property of the current regimes, which we might not like. I mean, it doesn't take too much to realize that, I say culture and history are not the same as the current government. Even though, in some quarters, they might perhaps draw some parallels. But no, I think it's great to expand the geography of Warhammer the Old World. And as I love what they've done with Cathay. I think if you could get the 80s Cathay models you could actually get them. I would be vaguely tempted. A bit of me would have been tempted to get hold of some of them. But they are very obscure, the 80s Cathay models, and they are lost in the mists of time. And even if you have one or two, it's probably quite rare.
Yeah.
And they had black powder weapons in that, and and they had some cavalry as well called temple hounds. They were a little bit like the Chinese restaurant crouching lions from kind of Taoist mythology. So you might get a heavy cav kind of unit that's a bit like demigriffs that might come down the line. I wouldn't be entirely surprised.
Yeah, so there's lots to be excited about.
There is a massive amount to be excited about, and I mean, clearly the game is moving. You know, the chat is moving. Things do feel as though they're up in the air. There's no ossification. It's generally a feeling that I think I've kind of enjoyed about being part of an actual journey, part of a conversation, part of a thing where there is chat. I mean, in this discussion, you know, we've talked about rules, we've talked about the community, we've talked about the lore of a new faction, you know, with potential intersections of real world history and politics. I mean, there aren't too many conversations you can't have through the prism of Warhammer the Old World, which is a wonderful thing about the hobby. When we're not just talking about painting and rolling dice, which is totally fine, but we're talking about lots of things because you know it's a broad canvas to express stuff, and I love how that's happening.